I'm John Chmaj. I'm here to talk about how to make climate and climate action cool again. Um, I think we're all on this journey together of trying to sort through what climate action means to us. As Marilyn pointed out, there's so many ways we can participate. As Amanda pointed out, there's whole lifestyles that are not climate friendly that we've gotten used to about how we eat and manage our food. There's all these things we do that Ann pointed out about how we measure, how we consume things and what we do with them. And so there's just a lot of thinking that goes into trying to be a climate aware person. It can be very intimidating, and you can get depressed, as Marilyn pointed out, pretty quickly by all the different messages you see. So what I'm going to try to do now is kind of unpack some positive messages we can evolve that really make it more fun, frankly, and more motivational, and make one feel more impactful in managing climate action. Now, this is based on, this presentation is based on a great book that Ann Fletcher brought to our ministry team called What We Think About When We Try Not to Think About Global Warming. And what Per Espen-Stokes, the author of this book, did was give some deep thought to how we manage our thought process and our psychology around climate action. What do we really think about? What's going on in our inner dialogue? And what he discovered and what he talks about with great validity is how we think motivates what we do. It sounds obvious, but let's talk a little bit about how that relates to climate action. There are actual barriers that many of us have, either consciously or subconsciously, to doing something about all the challenges we face. And this is not only relevant to climate action, but I think we'll see that the current pandemic situation not only allows opportunities for new thinking, as we mentioned earlier, but also that it actually is sort of a dress rehearsal in a way for a global crisis. And we're feeling it now. And so what value can we take from that? So I'm going to talk through some of his main points. And I recommend that you go and see his 15-minute TED Talk on YouTube. As Marilyn mentioned, we're going to have one-sheet summaries of each workshop with links for action. So for recycling, there'll be a one sheet. For food products and how to eat healthy, for organizations you can participate in, and for the topics we're going to cover in this presentation. They'll all be posted up on the eCam link against the eShore website. So you can follow along and find other resources after our presentations. So this sense of barriers comes directly from Per Espen-Stokes' book, that there are 5 basic barriers to climate action. The important thing to understand is that you can address each of these messages, and that's what I'm going to do now. Okay. All right. So let's talk about this notion of making it personal. What can we do if all these climate action things that are happening really are overwhelming and seem like they're these giant global trends? Well, what can we do locally and personally? It's been proven that setting an example or doing something that you share with others really changes people's mindset. If you're doing solar panels, it's been shown that lots of people around you may actually consider it because they see it working at your home next door. If you're doing things out in the community like we're doing here, sharing our ideas and thoughts, we engage our existing communities to share some of our positive ideas. It creates a different kind of energy that's real because it's people that we know, it's right in front of you, and it's things that are local and relevant to the way we live in our world. And these positive messages reinforce positive social norms. The media is not the place to go to get really positive messaging. And that's true for the virus too. If you've ever watched what I call virus TV, there's a lot of hope threaded in there like veins of gold in a mine, but really you can make these positive messages happen. You don't have to wait for a larger media. You can act locally. A lot of the things that Marilyn touched on in her presentation are around local action we can take, around how we use energy, around how we distribute waste, about some of the pipeline activity going on. There's tons of stuff that are local that we can act on that actually feel like we can have an impact and that we can actually make a difference. And finally, just a point to think about is, there's all this angst about leaders and who's going to, is our government going to take shape? The fact is that we can make things happen from the bottom up. And the more we act and share our ideas with each other, the more the politicians follow along. Leadership in this area comes from the bottom up. Now, this notion of doom comes from the fact that 80% of climate news employs this disaster frame. It's easy to get someone's attention. The Arctic is burning. Well, I'll tune in. I need to know what that means. That sounds pretty bad. So what you want to do is turn that around to positives. And here, in Per Espen Stokes' book, he has some really powerful, supportive framings. He says, well, all this cost of what you're going to lose, this and that, well, we do that all the time. It's called insurance. I insure my house, I insure my health, I insure my car. I mean, there's no end to the number of things we already think about creating insurance for potential risks. That's a good way, a positive way to think about what we're trying to do to create insurance for our next generation, for all the creatures. We're creating an insurance environment against potential risks. Likewise, you can take the notion of destruction and say, well, actually from destruction, really what we're talking about is health and well-being. If my air is cleaner, if my water is cleaner, if the foods that I eat are less tainted, I'm actually contributing to my own and the planet's health and well-being. Well, that's something I can buy into, right? I can get excited about that, being healthier, having good well-being. And likewise, this notion of uncertainty, I don't know what's happening. Well, then posit what you care about. I care about being prepared. I have certain ethical things about how I want this planet to be as a planet. And so I can express my values through my climate action in a positive way. And finally, this notion of opportunity. You know, my 2 cents on the unemployment situation right now is, why don't we take 250,000 people after this is over with and do our WPA for the 21st century and put them all in charge of building a green energy grid for the United States? That sounds kind of interesting to me. By the way, those would be good paying jobs and they'd be really powerful. There's all kinds of opportunities to improve our world and improve the way we use resources that are in front of us right now. We're so close. So there's a lot of really positives you can take out of this if you choose to think and act that way. Now, in terms of this notion of nothing I can do about it, well, the fact of the matter is that's what's led us to where we are now. Everybody's sort of acting in their own silos and eating what they eat. I mean, I personally was genuinely moved by the statistics that Amanda showed about the impact of livestock waste. You know, it's going to cause me to rethink how many cheeseburgers, well, I don't eat any cheeseburgers, but how many cheeseburgers I might eat. But the point is, we have to start thinking like eco-humans. That's a phrase that I sort of came to mind over the last year as we've been working in our climate action ministry, that we really need to be eco-humans. We need to think about, and eco-human is not a complicated thing, and many of us are doing a lot of these things already. How do we eat? How do we serve our food? How do we manage our food? What's our housing ecology? Are we taking a big footprint of energy? Are we wasting it through wasted energy out our ceilings? How much carbon do we use? There's a carbon footprint calculator I gave you in your one sheeter. You can go find out in 5 minutes how much carbon you're using. How do we move about? How do we transport ourselves? What kinds of vehicles do we use? How do we get from point A to point B? And then how do we consume and dispose of everything along the lines of at least what Ann was talking about from a home standpoint? There's lots of simple, really powerful choices we can make and celebrate about being eco-humans. This one's an interesting one. This idea about it can't be that bad, denial. Underneath that, if you sort of read a little further underneath that, there's sort of a subconscious discomfort that I don't want to be responsible, right? I mean, I can't deal with it, right? There's too many things. You know, my favorite, personally, just speak for myself, is this parts per million carbon thing. Like, I understand it, but when people start talking about thresholds and changes, and I get all freaked out because I can't change that. But I can change my personal measures about how I behave, how much carbon I use, how much I recycle and reuse, how do I consume my energy, how am I transporting myself around. So there's a lot of things you can do, and you can create little measures for that, just like a carbon calculator that it tells you, here's how much carbon you use, and if you did this, this, and this, you'd reduce your carbon by 25%. And you go, wow, I can actually do these things and measure the impact for me, which starts to make me feel empowered again around things that are very difficult to feel like you can take action on at a global level. And then finally, the notion of story. And this is well understood, right? The best way to communicate, and it's ages old, is to tell stories. People remember stories. It personalizes things. It makes things visual, and it invokes people's imagination. You show through the story what your message is, and not telling people. It can be humorous and witty. It can have all kinds of interesting, dramatic impact. And the more we can start learning and sharing stories about the story, a potential better future, the more exciting and engaged we can be with our friends and colleagues and neighbors and family around climate action. There's green growth stories, stories where people have created whole areas of new growth and maybe planting trees or doing things like that. There's all kinds of great green growth stories. The well-being narrative has to do with acting to make the earth a better place to live in, and a place that's healthy, and a place that and ways in which we've done that. People often tell the story about how Los Angeles got rid of pollution. It's doable. It was doable 30 years ago. And so there's lots of well-being narratives that we can start to adopt and embrace. And then find this notion of rewilding, bringing certain species back, creating additional or reclaiming habitat for things, and rewilding and letting nature get back in the game, right? And the thing you want to avoid is this notion of an apocalypse. It's very easy and fun in a perverse sort of way to share negative climate statistics. But really, the more you're doing that, two things are happening. One is you're now feeding that narrative by sharing it with other people and embedding that in their brain. And frankly, the more you tell those types of stories, the more you're subconsciously convincing yourself that that's the way things are going to be. And so there's a lot of benefit to explicitly working on these positive stories. Here's a good example of those of you who get National Geographic. This showed up in my mailbox this month. This is the front cover is two-sided. And if you look at one cover, you get this How We Lost the Planet. And then if you turn the magazine over, it's How We Saved the World. And this is fairly clever because it's not making a judgment either way. It's saying, it's all dependent on your point of view. And it's interesting down here. It says, not feeling so confident? Oh, well, go back to How We Lost the Planet. But then when you're reading this one, it says, well, I'm not ready to give up. Let's go back to How Save the World. So it's making a point that it's really kind of up to us how we want to think about this. So to summarize, the global warming book that Peresman Stokes wrote is very accessible. I highly recommend it. It's an easy read. And it talks about these 5 things. Make it personal. Make the actions you do and share with your friends. Make it cool, supportive. Think about positive emotions, positive actions, things we can do. 3 messages for every negative. Simple. Make it easy and convenient to be climate friendly. A lot of us are probably already recycling and caring for our transportation and caring for our environments. Let's celebrate that, and then let's continue to measure and think about how we can do more of that. And then using indicators to monitor our progress through signals. And finally, understanding the power of story and of what we say about climate action and how it impacts how we think and how others think. So the last bit I want to touch on is, you can't help but think that the current pandemic has a lot of characteristics to what may happen if we have some emergency in some part of the world where they're forced to be quarantined for whatever reason. One thing we can do is learn from this example and really prepare to take additional action in ways that will help the entire climate of the Earth. The first thing to understand is that we are an independent entity. One guy in China got sick, and now everybody's sick. I mean, you can't tell me that there's barriers to the Earth. We are an independent entity, and our life rests entirely on the health of the planet, right? This is just one little thing went south, and a lot of more things may happen this way. We need to acknowledge that we need to work together, and this is viscerally showing us this right now. Second thing that I'm learning through this is that we are resourceful. When we're sufficiently motivated and threatened, we will find solutions to this. Eventually, there will be a vaccine. Eventually there will be testing. Eventually there will be enough equipment. It's a sad and a sorry way to learn things, but we will figure this out because we have to. And that's my answer to people that talk about the Earth. We will figure this out because we have to. And along those lines, talk is cheap, action is priceless. And anything that any of us can do to take responsibility and act with integrity in common purpose strengthens everybody. And I will tell you, the thing I've learned, how long have I been at this, David? I think 2 or 3 years in the committee. I've evolved my positive thinking by just doing stuff. It wasn't like I had this great emotion and then I suddenly got on the committee. By doing it, you develop your sense of faith in it. So action really is the thing that changes your own view. And you find out that your lifestyle isn't that precious at all. The minute there's a crisis, there's only 3 things you care about. Am I healthy? Is my family healthy? And am I going to be able to survive in some ways? What's my welfare look like? Everything else falls away quickly. And that's a message that I don't think we really understood before coronavirus, that we just basically shut down our entire country, or most of it, quickly. And we're all surviving through it. And that teaches us that these crises are going to happen. faster than we can often respond. And so this actually argues for a change of thinking. How do we think in terms of preventative and restorative behavior? I mean, it's just like the positive messages around insurance and making sure that you're thinking ahead about what might happen and how you might manage that. And at the same time, thinking about restorative capabilities. How can we restore the earth, restore ourselves, think of ourselves ecologically, this notion of the eco-human. And so the good news is, it really is up to us. We get to decide, and there are lots of things we can do, and hopefully this book has given you some ideas. Because at the end of the day, this is the mission, not only for our generation, but ideally we can bequeath the beginnings of the right kind of behaviors to our children and our children's children. We're at that pivotal moment in history. I don't think any of us, I won't speak for anybody else, but I didn't grow up thinking that the earth was going to do this, but it's happened in the last 20 years, I'll tell you. And so we have the privilege to live in this era, this truly pivotal moment in the planet's history, not even our country, the planet, to honor the earth, get back in integrity with it, figure out how to take global actions, revision what's possible with the planet as an interdependent partner with us, and build those communities that are going to take us where we need to go. What more potent mission do you want? That's really exciting. And I'll just say, Henry Ford had an interesting idea about, whether you think you can or you think you can't. No, you're probably right. So I'll pause now and see if there's any questions before we close our session. I saw some chats coming up. I don't know, David, if there's any in there. I'll come to take a chance to go look now. I don't see anything here. Oh, this is coming up in a second. I want to go back to this after the questions. Are there any questions? I think we've worn you out with enough content. Let's move on to our call to action. So as we've been mentioning, there are resources on all of our workshops available off the eCam link off of esuc.org. David, did I say this link right? If there's any correction to where you've put the one-pagers, is that something you've put in the chat? I can't see it.
So that link will get you to a link to all the resources that every speaker has mentioned. And
great.
Anyway, so
that's great. Oh, that's a validation. Okay.
I think Amanda also put up the link too. Similar
okay.
link.
So we've got one-pagers for you online that have a bunch of links to interesting resources about things you can do and information you can get. Earth Day has gone digital, and the 50th anniversary is this Wednesday, the 22nd. And they've created a digital Earth Day finder here, which is pretty cool. You can just basically say what kind of event I want to participate in, what age and date range, and then what location, and it'll just show you all the different things that are going on. I mean, from my perspective, this is a year of Earth Day celebration, so it never stops, and it's just a great opportunity for us to work together, because really, it's our planet. So we want to thank you all for joining us. And
can I just add one thing?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just want to invite all of you to consider sort of sharing your ideas about what you'd like to see us do at eShore and in the wider community. We're always looking for some kind of collaborative efforts and welcome your ideas and your energy. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and thank you all for participating. Sorry, did someone want to say something?
Yeah, just say, Marilyn, this is Doug. For the high school youth group, we're planning to have a lot more activities in the fall. So if you wanted to do some activities with the youth group, we would welcome that, because an active youth group is a happy youth group. So
great, thank you. Gwen, you were going to say something too.
Yeah, I had a question for John. Before you mentioned, in one slide, you mentioned happiness, well-being, and integrated wealth. And I was wondering if you could say more about what you meant by integrated wealth.
Well, I think that stayed out, that stayed in from the Paris-Stokes talking points here. Yeah, I cribbed these from the book, and then I started to adjust them. And the slides got too long, so I started backing it out. And so I can appreciate this talking point is sort of oversimplified. It's really talking about, in the book, or in the notes that I got around the book, there's a talk about different types of indices. It's not just the economic. We always focus on our economic indicators. What about our natural indicators about our natural resources and how well we're using them? What about a climate health index? The idea that wealth is not just material possessions or economics. It's also the earth has wealth, and how well we're managing it is an indicator we want. Our personal health in the climate is an indicator. The health of species is an indicator. That's as much as I can say. I haven't studied it really carefully, but I thought it was a really interesting idea that capital is not just buildings and cars and money, right? It's all these other resources and thinking about an integrated way to use them. Hope that gives some flavor of it.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
One thing,